Thanks to everyone for coming out to our group author reading. This reading is brought to you by Strong Women, Strange Worlds, which is a group of authors supporting authors. Our mission is to elevate the voices of women and non-binary authors of science fiction, fantasy, and horror through events like our bi-monthly virtual quick read session. You can find out more about Strong Women, Strange Worlds in the handout that we've provided in the chat and by visiting our website, a link which will be added in the chat. And that's strongwomenstrangeworlds.weebly.com. I'd also like to take a moment to extend a special thank you to those who have made a tip jar donation. Thank you! We appreciate you guys so much. You guys really are what keep us able to run and able to put on these events. I am your host today, Kate, and you can find out more about me in that provided handout as well. Please note that recording of this session by the audience is not allowed, and recording of electronic communications, including Zoom meetings and webinars without permission, is illegal. Today, we will be featuring 6 authors: C.D. Britt, Jessica Cage, Janice Hardy, LCW Allingham, Tamika Thompson, and C.E. McGill. Each author will have 8 minutes to read. Our first reader today is C.D. Britt. C.D. Britt resides in Texas, where she has yet to adapt to the heat. Her husband thrives in it, so they will not be relocating to colder climates anytime soon. She is the author of the Reign of Goddesses series, Clan of Shadows series, and the Blood of Saviors series. C.D., take it away.
Thank you. So my name is Crystal. I write under the pen name CD, and I'm going to read, I guess, this is one of the covers for my book. So the other one's up there. Okay, so prologue, 840 AD, somewhere in Scandinavia. Persephone watched from atop the hill that overlooked the battleground. The mortal warrior, his leather armor creaking as he walked, had yet to notice her. Blood, not all of it his own, mixed with sweat, tears, and war paint across his face and down the long braids that tangled at his temples. He checked for survivors among the dead, hoping to see that some of his men had lived. If he could not bring them home alive, he would honor them with a proper burial. Persephone knew this soul. This soul throughout his lives had always chosen war, something that conflicted with his true nature, the one Persephone saw when she guided his soul to the afterlife. She rarely guided the dead to her realm, preferring to take care of them once they arrived. But his soul only ever called to her and not Thanatos, her reaper. And she answered, escorting him to the underworld herself. There was very little Persephone did not understand about death, but the warrior's soul's ability to summon her to the deaths of his men and his own was one of them. When the life the soul had lived was assessed, it proved to be deeply caring and affectionate, regardless of its mortal coil. It never mattered what body he was born into, his spirit was always that of a warrior, always standing between the innocent and certain doom. He did not bring his army to war for power or land, but for justice and freedom. His face was solemn as he prayed to the old gods, ones that she knew were not real, for his fallen brethren. In that moment, he allowed his emotions free. Losing his comrades was a hell he would live in for the rest of his mortal days. The Viking finally looked up at Persephone, somehow sensing her presence as he always did when she came to take his soldiers to their final resting place, and Persephone delighted in the eye contact that no mortal should be able to make. He placed his fist over his heart and lowered his head. She wondered as she watched him if he held a latent power, but she saw no unbound abilities when his soul crossed her gates. Just a lovely soul she felt more and more affection for over the millennia. Though the man bowing his head before her did not know her, his mortal mind thinking her a Valkyrie, his soul always remembered her, as if she were home to him as he was becoming home to her. After returning his gesture, Persephone called his slain brothers to her, the perished warriors heeding her call to avoid trapping themselves in the mortal plane as a soul without a vessel. They used her as a gateway to the underworld, a world attached to this one that only the dead could find, a veil between this world and hers where she cherished and guarded her souls. Before they passed through her form, each soul stopped and placed a fist over the heart as they nodded to their leader in respect. And although her warrior watched on, he only ever saw her, not his men, and she wondered why. She felt the souls as they passed through her and was overwhelmed by the love they felt for him. They knew that he fought and died beside them, and they loved him as they did their own kin. Persephone was fascinated and awed by such respect. After the last soul passed through her, Persephone looked at the warrior again, knowing she would not look upon his face until it was his time, until the countless wars finally punished his psyche too much for them to continue the fight. The mortal man that the soul currently inhabited smiled at her, always a handsome smile, then turned from her and began the funeral rites to ensure the proper burial. Until I see you again, Persephone, she whispered to him, the wind carrying her voice. My warrior. Chapter 1, 2164 AD, City of Halcyon. Persephone had found the Moirai to be consistent in one thing and one thing only, their dramatic natures. The room where they worked the strings of fate changed with their moods. Today, her seat in front of the Moirai was a crushed black velvet armchair that shimmered with an impression of Persephone's shadowy magic. Hera had warned her of this. They were reminding her of her position and status as the goddess of the underworld by placing such a chair for her to sit in before them. She allowed herself an internal groan as she lowered herself into the seat. Wearing bright white robes, the Moirai were in their three-sister form that some had once called the Fates. One sister appeared old, one middle-aged, and one young, but their minds were ancient and blended among each other. When they moved together to form one being, the Moirai, their faces shifted between the ages. Percy, Clotho called out, her head tilted like a playful puppy. You heeded our summons. Clotho was the most outgoing of the sisters, the most likely to be friendly to the goddesses. Persephone remained stiffly sitting in the chair, but she bristled at the childish name that Clotho always used for her. Persephone's face was cold and stoic, the most natural expression or non-expression for her. I wasn't aware I could deny, she stated blandly. A broad smile crossed Clotho's face, and Persephone was sure it belied the trouble she was about to release onto her. The Moirai toyed with the goddesses as they did all things, and that smile was just another twist of the strings. Although Persephone thought being sequestered to the top of a tower was hardship enough for the Moirai, she couldn't stop herself from wanting to dole out some torment of her own from time to time when she was called in like this. I spun the most beautiful strings so very long ago, Clotho responded fondly, her voice now soft, the childish quality almost a whisper as if she were sharing a secret. Then it turned black. No light escaped my beautiful string. The weave absorbed the darkness. So incredibly sad. Waiting patiently with her hands folded in her lap, Persephone kept her face completely indifferent. They could go on like this for a while. Patience, she thought, and reminded herself that sometimes they were lucid enough to give her more than tiny fragments of their vision. Sometimes. Lachesis measured it 5 times before we summoned you. It was so exceptionally long, but now my beautiful string must be cut, Clotho cried, a tear falling down her cheek. Persephone refrained from letting out a long, irritated sigh. Clotho weeping was just another normal day at the Fates, and she knew she needed to say something before the full dramatics began. Clotho, your string is a mortal's life, and life must be cut for the mortals to remain mortal. Why am I... She hadn't finished before Atropos took her scissors, ones that were made from pure starlight, and cut the string. A blinding light flashed for a moment, turning the entire room white as Persephone felt a tug on her soul, a tug harder than she'd ever felt. She immediately shot up from the chair and swayed. Her body felt all the signs of a shadow portal opening and pulling at her. Panic filled her at this new sensation, as she had always controlled her own shadows in the portals they held. Her eyes widened and moved to the Moirai, who stood next to the cut string. The string itself had begun to fade away as the sisters turned as one to look at Persephone. Life and death must balance, Clotho yelled as the shadows swirled around Persephone, preparing to claim her. Persephone reached her hand out to hold onto the chair just as everything around her turned black. That's my reading.
That was fantastic. I am super intrigued. I know I'm not the only person that's like sitting here going like, can I open an Amazon link and buy that book in the middle of the reading? Great job. Our second reader is going to be Jessica Cage. Jessica Cage is an international award-winning and USA Today best-selling author of speculative fiction and urban fantasy novels. The author of 38 fiction titles, she continues to produce stories that give representation to marginalized communities in fantasy landscapes. Jessica, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. So I'm actually going to be reading a scene after the inciting incident. Thought it would be good to get some dialogue. So the princess is returning home after a big oil spill, basically the best way to explain it. Malway, the relieved voice of Seru, called out to her through the chaos. Draco, Maui cursed beneath her breath as she stopped swimming. She considered trying to outswim the guard, but knew Seru was much faster than her. She didn't stand a chance. Thank the goddess, Seru reached her. You're okay. I was about to take to surface to find you. I'm fine, Sarah. Maui brushed off her concerns. Seru did not understand why Maui did what she did when she went to the surface. It was one secret she allowed her to keep after she promised she'd stay away from the general population of Forge. Where are my sisters? They're safe inside. Your parents are out trying to help others. I figured they might be. Maui cast a glance over her shoulder toward the danger. And you were going to join them? Seru knew exactly what she was thinking. You can't go there, Maui. You know that. It isn't safe for you. It's against our protocols. Isn't that the right thing to do? She looked Seru in the eye. You're always talking about how I need to face my responsibilities. I'm a part of the Royal Lanu, which means I'm responsible for our human. I should be out there trying to help make sure everyone is okay. Now you want to take on the burden of responsibility? Seru threw up her hands. I swear, I don't understand you at all. I'm glad you're willing to face your duties. However, this is not the time. I am insisting you put them aside. At least until we know what's happening, we need to keep you and your sister safe. I already know what's happening. It's Forge. They did this. Maui admitted the truth, knowing it would raise suspicion with her guardian. Whatever they're doing up there is the reason this is happening here. And how would you know that? Seru's jaw tightened as she pulled Maui out of the way of a scour whale, an enormous creature with 7 translucent tentacles that stretched from its belly to sweep the ocean floor. Because I saw it with my own eyes. Maui dropped her eyes from the inquisitive face of her in front of her. It was like they cut open the side of the island. And when they did, it bled out into the ocean. Okay, we'll discuss how you saw this later, considering you promised to stay away from the land griffins. Seru paused. What do you mean the island bled out? It was horrible. There was a loud popping sound and the ground trembled. A moment later, there was shouting. I ran to see what happened, and the sound of terror filled the air as humans screamed and ran to escape the danger. A moment later, I saw it pour out the side of the island. Maui explained what happened. We have to contain it. If we don't, it's going to keep spreading through our home, and it's going to hurt everything it touches. I'm not even sure they stopped it. As soon as I saw what happened, I rushed home. I wanted to get back here so I could help. My only concern right now is making sure you get somewhere safe. You need to go inside with your sisters. You want me to just sit there and do nothing? Maui took one last shot at convincing Seru to give in. Is that what you would do? You asked what I want. That's exactly what I want. You will go inside and wait until your parents get back. Seru turned and swam toward the palace. This isn't about what I would do, Maui. They want us to sit back, keep our mouths closed, and do nothing, she replied in a resigned tone. This is the one time I can't do that. Not when I know we could help our human. This is not your job. There are other human equipped to take care of this. Please, for once, listen to reason. I know you don't like tradition, and I know you want to go against what's expected of you. This is one of those times when it's best for everyone if you stay put. Sit with your sisters, comfort them in this difficult time, and wait for your parents to return. Okay, you're right. Maui conceded as she thought of her sisters who were likely worried about her. Fine, I'll go. They made it back to the palace, and Seru insisted Maui redress before joining her sisters. There was enough going on without adding more suspicion about her attire. As soon as Maui was back in her royal robes, they swam to the panic room at the bottom of the palace. It was the safest place for the sisters. Maui, her youngest sister, swam to her and wrapped her arms around her waist the second she stepped in the room. I was so worried about you. I'm all right. Maui hugged her little sister back. It's okay now. Everything is going to be okay. Always running off and getting into trouble, Cal, her oldest sister, commented as she swam over, her heavy robes poised perfectly on her shoulders. Are you blaming this on me? Maui rolled her eyes. You can't be serious. Just because I skipped out on a meeting? Shouldn't I be? Cal narrowed her eyes. You left court and went who knows where and now suddenly writes. I left the court and cut a hole in the side of the island that's spilling acidic fluid into the water. That's my fault. Maui cut her off. You hear how ridiculous that claim is, don't you? I'm not about to argue with you on this, Cal waved her sister off, because you know how idiotic you sound, Maui laughed, because yet again, Cal's attempt to make her look incompetent had backfired. Just because I don't want to sit through these pointless meetings does not mean I'm out creating trouble when I'm not here. When I leave, it's in search for peace and for freedom. Something you've known your entire life, but I have not. Whatever you have to tell yourself to make you feel better about stepping out on your responsibilities. Cal huffed and turned her back on her sisters. Her lips pressed together in a thin line. Can we not fight right now? Now tightened her hold around Maui's wrist. I'm worried about our parents and about the city. How can you be arguing about whether she wants to be sitting here in meetings? Who cares? She's right. No one cares about this. Maui put her arm around her little sister's shoulder and ushered her over to the seats. Our parents will be all right. They're just making sure everyone's okay. And they'll be right back, I promise. Is it really bad out there? Now looked up at her sister. You're the only one who saw it. Yeah, it is. Maui relayed it to her little sister. Though she wanted to protect her, as all older siblings did, she knew it wouldn't help to keep secrets, especially when the lie would be so obvious. Whatever was going on, it was exactly what the court and the royal Anu had argued about. Things in their home were about to change forever, and it directly resulted from the actions of the human of Forge. Okay, that's it. I think I went a little short, but that's it. I wanted to show a scene from the book where the danger is happening. They live in a world that is governed by a goddess who will punish them for hurting their earth. And well, their sister species just did something really terrible to the world. And it's about how they struggled through that. So that's it. Thank you.
I loved that you picked that scene, and I love that you picked this like interaction between the two, well, not the, but all the sisters, because it felt very, I have sisters, only sisters, and it felt very authentic and like, whoo!
Yeah,
I'm so excited to read it.
The family dynamic is so important, so I wanted to showcase that.
For sure. Awesome. Great job. I loved it. All right, our third reader today is Janice Hardy. Janice Hardy is the award-winning fantasy author for teens and adults and the founder of Fiction University. When she's not writing about writing, she spins tales of adventure and firmly believes that doing terrible things to her characters makes them more interesting. My kind of girl. Her novels include The Shifter and Blood Ties. Janice, whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you. I'm going to read the opening of my urban fantasy, and this is up to the point and just about where my protagonist Grace realizes that everything she hoped and dreamed is about to go absolutely down the drains, and she's about to be thrown into a lot of really horrible things, which is fun. So, the child was pure evil, no doubt about it. The bane of the entire prosthetics ward, so naturally they dumped her on me. Being the new gal anywhere had its share of drawbacks, and Andrews Medical Center was no different, hence the Saturday shift and the problem patient hazing. For 5 days, I'd put up with Daisy's faux woe is me show, though I'd stopped falling for that trembling lip and tear-soaked eyes act on day 2. I know it hurts, Daisy, but you can do it, I said, voice level. One did not cajole the devil child lightly. You don't know anything, Miss Legs. Not her best rejoinder, but I admired her skill at avoiding repetition. I knelt beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. I know if you don't do therapy, you'll be stuck in that wheelchair. I tipped my head at the chair, crammed next to the therapy stairs like it had pissed off its father. Put your other leg on and let's get to work. I hate these things more than I hate you. She glared at the prosthetic she hadn't yet put on as if it could burst into flames by sheer will. So don't let them win. Her glare shifted to the floor in front of her, and I mentally crossed my fingers. 1, 2, she made it to 5. They're not alive. They can't win anything, she screeched, swinging her leg at me. I braced for impact. You're so stupid. Go away. I granted her 2 hits, then caught the leg in both hands and jerked it away from her. I was all for catharsis, but those things were expensive. Daisy, put your leg on. No, I hate it. The newer patient shot her sympathetic glances while the regulars rolled their eyes and shook their heads. Many a physical therapist had fallen to Daisy's mighty tantrums, and she'd gone through every assistant on the floor. I was a little surprised they hadn't saddled me with her sooner. It would be quite the coup if I managed to get her walking again. To do that, though, I'd have to stay. The travel aspect was a big part of being a traveling physical therapy assistant. 13 weeks, then it was off to a new town, new hospital, new set of faces, and all the security life on the move brought me, even if it did seem safe here. Besides, nice as Fort Lauderdale was, it was half a country away from Dad and the call I'd been dreading for far too long. Still, I liked it here, enough that I was on my third temp rotation and actually knew most of my coworkers' names. For the first time in my life, I actually had a life. And Mrs. Johnson even asked me about staying on permanently. Imagine that. A permanent home, a permanent life, no more running? Is that even possible? Dad would say no. I wish I could say yes. Sighing, I dropped the prosthesis in Daisy's lap. A hint of sweaty neglect wafted up from it. Someone wasn't keeping it clean, but that was an argument for another day. Okay, if that's what you want. Seriously? She peeked up at me through a protective shield of blonde hair. It's your life. I'll get your chair and you can go. I turned my back and headed for the wheelchair. Tissue paper flowers had been taped to the handles yesterday, but only a few bits of torn paper remained. They shone bright against the hospital beige walls and the poster for the weekly amputee support group. She let me reach the chair this time. That was new. She never struck me as a quitter, despite the tantrums and the attitude. I flipped the chair around and wheeled it back, walking it down in front of her. All yours. Summoning the melodrama only a 12-year-old could muster, she dropped her leg to the floor, ripped off the second one in record time, and flung herself into the chair. I hate you. Maybe she meant me, maybe the chair. With Daisy, it was hard to tell. Take care of yourself, kid. I ruffled her hair for good measure. Stupid physical therapy, she muttered, rolling away. She slapped the wheels with every push. Determination, thy name was Daisy. If only she channeled that into learning to walk again. One of the other PTAs, Libby Torres, caught my attention from across the room. She raised an eyebrow at me. I could almost hear the supportive, "You good?" that had started plenty of conversations my first week here. Her friendly tenacity had led to a bunch of dinners and a lot of laughter, and shockingly enough, an actual, honest-to-goodness friendship. It had been years since anyone had been that nice to me at work. I wasn't sure anyone had ever put effort into being my friend. I'd never lived anywhere long enough to make friends. I smiled and waved her off, a silent thanks for the backup. It's fine, my casual head toss said. But Daisy had never gone this far before. I'd only been working with her a short time, but I knew the type. Hell, I'd been the type. Come on, devil child, turn around. The pity me routine was a load of crap, and we both knew it. On our first session, she dug her fingers into her chair arms almost every time her mom fussed over her, as if she were some kind of delicate flower no stronger than the ones taped to her chair. Mom's idea, of course. The third time her dad had atta-girled her, she'd flipped him off. She'd made gagging motions through the entire "she's such a brave, brave girl" speech. I didn't know about brave, but she was pissed, and if it wasn't over losing her legs. First person to figure out why might be able to help her. She rolled on, still no signs of stopping. I couldn't have read her wrong. She was a fighter for sure. She needed an enemy to fight, and it couldn't be her legs. She'd never accept them if they took the brunt of all that anger. 5 feet from the elevator, she stopped. Her head cocked to the right, the tiniest bit, and I caught a flick of her gaze checking up on me. Atta girl. I walked into her field of view and picked up her legs, then turned towards the trash bin on the far wall next to the nurse's station. A cute guy in a cheap suit glanced our way. Nurse Williams eyed me over her bright pink glasses with all the disapproval of a foreman behind schedule. Please, as if I'd throw away perfectly good prosthetics. The frown reminded me of Dad, though, and the worry I'd been fighting all year and chipped up my tough love facade. Not here, not now. Focus on Daisy's pain, not yours. I reached the trash bin, pushed open the lid, and wrinkled my nose. Someone had had fish tacos again for lunch. I made a show of trying to find the right angle to shove the legs in. Come on, kiddo, cry uncle. Miss Harper, wait, Daisy said softly. Yes. I heaved a sigh as dramatic as hers and turned around. Need something? Daisy scowled at me, her shoulders stiff, pouting like a pro and clearly wanting to tell me to go to hell. But I had her. I'd passed whatever test her parents kept failing. She rolled over to me and held out her hands. Fine, I'll do the stupid exercises. Suit yourself. You paid for the full hour. I wiggled one of her legs. You ordered the extra crispy 2-piece, right? Damn near got a smile. Just give them to me, she muttered. She shoved herself past the guy in the cheap suit and nearly ran over his toes. He didn't even glance at her, just kept his gaze on me. Grace Harper, he said, short, clipped, not a question. I froze for a second longer than I should have. Daisy had already identified me, so it wasn't as if I could say no. Yes. May I ask you a few questions? I gestured at Daisy, glowering at us from a minimum safe distance. If this guy screwed this up. Sorry, I'm with a patient right now. It'll only take a minute. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a yellowed piece of paper. Nurse Williams shot me a look that said, keep it short. Yeah, I planned on it. And you are, I asked. No badge, but he acted like a cop. His hopeful yet wary blue eyes hinted that he'd seen things he wished he hadn't. His black hair had a distracted scruffiness to it, neat on the back and sides, a tad long on the top. Almost a professor vibe, though he couldn't have been older than 30. I'm Nate Kavanaugh. Are any of these names familiar to you? I don't have time for, please, Miss Harper, a woman's life is at stake. He held the paper closer. I took it. Not paper, but something thick and glossy, even though it was yellowed and old. It reminded me of the scrolls I saw at museum Dad had taken me to. 8 names were listed in delicate script, 4 names crossed off. The ink looked just as old, faded, and dark red. Except for the name at the bottom. That one was brand new in bright blue ink. Why is my name on this list? I asked, chest tight. That's what I'd like to know. And that's when Grace's life totally gets turned upside down again. And that's the end of my reading. I hope you enjoyed it.
I am in love with like both sides of this. I love that we've got this mysterious list, but I also love her interactions with Daisy. I'm in love with Daisy. I hope she is throughout the whole book. Don't tell me, no spoilers. But it was so good, and the voices and the characterizations were on point. Great job.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Our 4th reader today is LCW Allingham. LCW Allingham is a Philadelphia area author, artist, and editor. Her short fiction has appeared in numerous anthologies, and she is the co-founder and executive editor of the indie press Speculation Publications. Her horror novella, Muse, and her debut historical novel, Lady, will both be out in 2024. LCW, whenever you're ready.
Hi, I'm LC, and I will be reading you guys the intro of my upcoming dark fantasy novella, Muse. It comes out April 9th, and I will be giving away an e-copy of this, as well as an e-copy of the Spec Pub feminist horror anthology, Incubate. Glonseal's done. Dried up, Mr. Black said, tapping the tips of his long fingers together at the head of the mahogany table. She hasn't painted so much as a dandelion since May. She might have something left in her, Mr. Green said. She was talking about sunflowers when I spoke to her last night. The paneled room was kept dim, the tall windows blocked by thick velvet drapes. Narrow, red, tapered candles from the grand chandelier provided flickering light. She's done, agreed Mr. Silver. The candlelight caught streaks of gold in his dark blonde hair. Cut her off. So is Jackson, said Mr. Black. The next exhibition will be his last. Leek Jackson said he's working on an entirely new concept. Mr. Green pinched his thin lips together and worked his thumbnail underneath the table where he found the familiar dent he had created over the years. If he doesn't produce in a month, he's no good to us. We'll wait and see how he does. Mr. Black drummed his long fingers on the table to indicate the decision was made. Fleck is still going strong, Mr. Green suggested. I previewed his new pastel collection last month. It's magnificent. Not magnificent enough. Mr. Silver shook his head. I'm disappointed with Fleck. He seemed like he was going to be a long haul. When was the last time we had a long haul? Mr. Black frowned, the lines around his mouth folding into deep creases that hinted at his age. Too long, said Mr. Silver. If you would just give them a chance. Mr. Green started, but under the glare of his associates, he withered into his seat. More talent then, Mr. Black said. Better talent. Better and bankable, agreed Mr. Silver. Shedrick Fleck has only started, Mr. Green said, his gray eyes shining with what could have been mistaken as tears. He's going down fast, said Mr. Black. Too fast, said Mr. Silver. He still does have a spark left in him, Mr. Black added, his lip curling slightly as if he was practicing his smoldering looks right there at the table. But the way he goes, it won't be long. Find someone new. Something fresh. Something powerful. Mr. Green stood abruptly, taking a minute to adjust the lapels of his bespoke Italian suit coat. before stalking out of the dark conference room. After slamming the door of the Manhattan brownstone, Mr. Silver yawned and leaned back in his chair. He's too sensitive. He always has been, Mr. Black said, but he is the best. Oh, no doubt, no doubt. Still, I wonder if he won't become a problem. If he does, we'll address it, Mr. Black said. We thrive and fall together, and Mr. Green very much wants to thrive. The net was cast wide, Miami, Kansas City, country clubs and youth groups, each whisper, examined, cataloged, and thrown back to sea. Mr. Green would know when he found his white whale, but until he did, he traveled through sticky stops and sweltering stations, packed in with the sweating masses, slogging through their art-starved lives. He rested each night in five-star hotels with $40 martinis and Egyptian cotton sheets. He moved through the faceless swarms, waiting for a tug on the line. Mr. Green dozed in a bus station, wavering on an old dream of the French countryside, the taste of mud in his mouth, the stench of marsh in his nostrils when the line went live. The sudden jolt so hard and sharp it nearly yanked him from his tacky plastic chair. A buzz ran up his legs, and his dreams faded into his senses, filled with clean, green scent of spring in early bloom. That old bastard welder I work with, a neo-hipster punk in a bus terminal, said into his phone. No, the one who's always carting around the art supplies. Dude lives in double wide in Park Flats, jacked as shit. But he's all over at the craft store on his lunch break. Nah, he says it's for his neighbor. When the young man got off the phone, Mr. Green leaned back, smiling disarmingly. Excuse me, sir, I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I couldn't help but overhear something you said. You see, I'm an art dealer. He reached into his suit and pulled out his business card and a $50 bill. A traded bus ticket, another odorous ride, then a cab to a mud pit in the middle of the sticks. The line got brighter the closer he came, the promise of ripe fruit, like a lure shining just below the surface of a lake. Mr. Green's net closed, and he pulled it in, finding himself at the dirty, dented door of the ancient modular home of Miss Terri Demarais. Two trailers in Park Flats' mobile home community had somehow shifted closer to each other over the years. One belonged to Jim Megas, a middle-aged second-shift welder and the meanest old bastard anyone had ever met. The other was occupied by a skinny girl with dishwater-colored hair and big black eyes so unsettling that her neighbors went out of her way to avoid her. Her name was Terri Demarais, but her neighbors called her the Flats Witch. These two villains of the trailer park seemed to get along well with each other. Sometimes Jim left a bag of groceries on the step of the girl's narrow modular, and sometimes the girl left bottles of Old Granddad on the steps of Jim's double wide. No one had ever heard the witch speak, but it seemed she talked to Jim, and it seemed Jim talked about her to somebody, somewhere, and just what it was that she did inside her trailer. When Mr. Green showed up at the door of Terri Demarais' modular, she let him in. After all, he was a swanky man wearing a suit and shiny shoes flecked with trailer park mud, and she was just Tara, the Flats Witch, a shut-in with no job and only one friend. I think there's some sort of confusion here, she said. I don't got nothing you'd be looking to be buying. Mr. Green brushed past her and saw she was lying. Terri Demarais' trailer was cluttered with paintings like he'd never seen in his very long life. Cheap craft store temperas that were so vivid and so unique that he froze mid-stride, waiting or gazing upon their glory. Miss Demarais worked in abstract, such beautiful compositions that he nearly cried right there in her trailer. There were colors he'd never seen before, structures he'd never dreamed of, each piece a poem, a song, a wretched and rejoicing moment of life. His heart lifted and he plummeted with the butterfly queasiness of a roller coaster. Raw talent, undiscovered and ignorant, and he had found her. She would be his, not Black's, not Silver's. He would be the one to take her, to keep her until he was sure she could withstand their greedy needs. Thank you.
Don't tell me, but I do need to know. Are Mr. Green, Mr. Black, and Mr. Silver demons? Don't tell me. Don't tell me. Tell me after. We'll talk about it later. I loved everything about that. And I think I speak for a lot of us when I say, when we are imagining her beautiful abstract paintings, we're looking right over your shoulder at the stuff that you've made. It's so pretty. All right. And our fifth reader today is Tamika Thompson. Tamika Thompson is the author of speculative fiction collection Unshod, Cackling, and Naked, which Publishers Weekly calls powerful, unsettling, and terrifying, and the author of the horror novella Salamander Justice. Her work has appeared in several speculative fiction anthologies, as well as in Interzone, Prairie Schooner, and the New York Times, among others. Tamika, go ahead.
Thank you, everybody, for coming today. I'm recovering from a cold, so I'm a little hoarse, but hopefully it won't cause too much commotion. The excerpt I'm going to read for you is from the first story in my collection. The story is called The Turn, and it opens with the main character in an on-again, off-again relationship with their ex-boyfriend, Micah. The main character has begun noticing strange signs involving the dogs in the town where they live. The parking lot at the assisted living home where I organized activities and coordinated meal times for seniors became littered with missing dog flyers, some large, others small, and with varying display techniques, tacked up on telephone poles, taped to doors, and thrust under wiper blades on car windshields. Entire windows were plastered with the signs. Some light poles held up flyers of 4 or 5 family dogs, poodle, Pomeranian, Pekingese, and pug. No one knew where they'd gone, but the nights were filled with distant howls that lasted for hours. It was as if there was a dog convention out yonder and humans couldn't find it. The dogs who remained with their owners grew isolated and antisocial. Folks who were used to their pooch climbing in bed with them noticed their dog would find a corner in a room all to itself and sleep there instead. Their pets no longer rose and greeted them at the door when they entered. The dogs were fine physically, eating heartily, with regular digestive systems, ran when they were outside, and interacted with one another as usual, playing, cuddling, fighting to maintain rank. They just seemed uninterested in the humans who filled their lives. One morning, a black and rust Doberman Pinscher showed up on my porch and stared at me through the picture window. Eating a banana nut muffin and sipping coffee in my kitchen, I felt the dog's gaze on me before I noticed it was there. And when we locked eyes, I dropped the muffin and the mug. The shards scattered across the tile. One swiped my ankle and drew blood. When I searched the window again, the Doberman was gone. A month later, I saw a news article about dogs dying from an odd illness in which they no longer rose to eat and play each day until eventually they just stopped breathing. Vets performed autopsies and sent samples to labs, and that's how the microbe was discovered. Social media was filled with teary-eyed owners posting about their dead fur babies. Some folks held doggy funerals, and others decided to make video tributes to their pups ahead of their demise. The dogs that had run away all seemed fine. Micah and I joked that the dogs had probably developed an allergy to humans. The night howling grew in volume and sounded closer than what I remembered in the beginning. Then one evening, the residents at my job were having a cutest dog contest in which they dressed up their pets in doggy gowns and tiaras and made them model down the dog run for bone-shaped biscuits. Though I'd been asked, I refused to judge the pageant and had to restrain myself from stripping off the dog's garments, opening the iron entry gates and setting them loose. As I cleared up morsels of beef treats, ruffled puppy boas, and squeaky rubber ball toys from the activity lounge, Mrs. Petrosky nodded off in the corner, but woke when she heard the distant animal calls. She rose from the rocking chair with creaking bones and an unsteady gait, and attempted to hurry down the hall to her apartment. Everything okay, Mrs. Petrosky? I followed her. It wasn't like her to move about so quickly, and this was the most I'd seen her walk without her cane in the 4 years I'd worked at New Adventures Assisted Living. He'll scratch a hole in the wood if I don't let him out. She unlocked her apartment, and her golden retriever Henry leapt out of the front door, throwing the woman off balance and knocking her to the floor. Henry dashed down the hallway, and when he came to the glass double doors that led to the parking lot, he raised on his hind legs and used his front paws to push the metal bar to open them. I rushed to Mrs. Petrosky, who'd landed on her bottom hard enough to dislodge her dentures and send her wig flying to the carpet. I helped her up and into her unit. Luckily, she was uninjured, but her hands trembled. Whenever he hears the others, he goes crazy. It's not like he's never heard howls before, but with this, it's like they're calling him. Who? The pack. Does he usually come right back? I eased her onto the couch and grabbed her a glass of water. She shook her head, handed the glass back to me, and pointed to a bottle of cognac on her counter. Get 2 glasses. She wrung her hands as I poured shots for both of us. Since it all started, every night, Henry raises his head at the sound, stares at the window, and then, instead of howling back like a sensible mutt, he scratches at the door until I wake up and let him out. Then hours later, as I get myself to the bathroom for my nighttime routine, get the linens ready, and I'm just about to climb in bed, he's back, scratching at the door. What do you think he does out there? I don't know, but one time he returned with blood on him. I searched his fur from head to toe, but didn't find any cuts. Isn't this all so strange, dear? Henry did not come back that evening. 2 days later, the turn occurred. Thank you. For the giveaway, I am offering a signed paperback copy of my collection, Unshy, Cackling, and Naked, Where the Turn Came From, in addition to some other books. So hopefully you guys fill out that form.
I think I speak for a lot of us when I say we're all filling out that form because we all want to win that copy and find out what is going on. My vote is on Doggy Fight Club. The first rule of Doggy Fight Club is you can't bark about Doggy Fight Club. I know, you can't tell me, but you could tell me. We'll talk. It's fine. This is what the author Q&A is going to be. Just me making you guys tell me what's actually happening. All right. Our final reader of today is C.E. McGill. C.E. McGill is a writer of speculative and historical fiction. Born in Scotland and raised in North Carolina, McGill is the author of the novel Our Hideous Progeny, and their short fiction has appeared in Fantasy Magazine and Strange Constellations. You can find them online at C_E_McGill. CE, whenever you're ready.
All right, so I'm going to be reading from Our Hideous Progeny, which is my spin-off of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein about Richard Frankenstein's great niece who decides to follow in his footsteps and prove that women can be unhinged mad scientists too. Prologue. Could you, said the inspector, run it all by me one more time, Mrs. Sutherland? I took my time in answering. I paused to smooth out my skirts and steady my breathing, to survey the room, its single grimy window, the awful narrow wood-panelled walls that gave one the impression of being trapped inside a cabinet. I do not consider myself an expert in lying by any means, but if there is one thing I have learned on the subject over the course of my life, it is this. Lies cannot be rushed. They must be spun evenly and carefully. Too fast, and you risk tangling up the details. too slow, and it sounds like a stage performance, scripted from the start. And so, despite my racing heart, I paused. I already laid it all out before the magistrate this afternoon, I said, and the constable before that, not to mention Mr. Wilkinson and... Yes, well, the inspector squinted at me rather reproachfully through his pince-nez. A man is dead, Mrs. Sutherland. We must make sure we record every detail. I'm sure you can spare just a few more moments of your time. I looked down at my hands, at the bandages wound around my palms and up my wrists. 4 small red crescents bled through the fabric on each hand where my nails had dug in. Of course, although this part I could not bear to take my time over, though I suppose that was all right, as it was not a lie. Would you make a note, sir, that I plan to go by my maiden name in future, in case you need to find me in London? The inspector paused, his pen poised above his notebook, and raised an eyebrow. And what would that be? Frankenstein, I replied. Mary Elizabeth Frankenstein. It was a grey and foggy March day when we brought it to life at last. I had expected there to be thunder, or at the very least some rain. I had expected that, on such a momentous occasion, nature would have been obliged to provide us with a fitting backdrop. But evidently, nature felt that she owed us no favours, as the morning dawned dull as always, wreathed in a thick mist that dampened clothes and sound alike as it crept over the hills. I took a measure of grim satisfaction in Clark's bedraggled appearance as he let us into the boathouse. He'd come to us bright-eyed and brimming with confidence. Now, in his rumpled shirt sleeves, with grey shadowing his jaw and the skin beneath his eyes, he seemed but a dim reflection of his former self. Henry, meanwhile, outshone us all in his morning coat, the same he had worn on our honeymoon in Lyme, and which had shown the dust of the chalk cliffs so badly. Perhaps he was hoping to make a good first impression. We examined our instruments one final time, the bellows to provide the breath of life, the stove in the corner to drive the spring chill from the room and make its cold flesh warm again, the beakers of elixir upon the work table bubbling merrily on their burners. I measured out a vial and handed it to Clark to administer. Then, having nothing else to do, I leaned in close to the creature and laid a hand gently upon its neck. Is it warm enough, Mary? Henry asked. I nodded, startled to hear his voice. The room had been so silent before, as still as a church mid-prayer. We had built here in this half-ruined boathouse on the edge of the Murray Firth, a temple to our own strange gods, to chemistry and anatomy and electricity. There was an acrid smell in the room as the procedure began. The air felt prickly and sharp, bursting with potential, like the moment before lightning strikes. But there was no bang, no flash, no grand transformation, only something dead one minute and alive the next. Its flippers twitched, its great curved back began to rise and fall of its own accord. And its eyes. I will always hold dear to my heart the fact that I was the first to see those golden eyes open, to see its reptilian pupils narrow and focus on my own. For in those eyes I saw for the first time proof that we had created something truly alive. But that isn't right. No, I'm getting ahead of myself. That isn't really how it all began. And then I'll read just a little bit of chapter 1 as well. Ours was a house of mourning. She no longer took delight in her ordinary occupations. All pleasure seemed to her sacrilege towards the dead. Mary Shelley, Frankenstein. It began, rather, with a black-edged envelope. It must have been late afternoon when it arrived, for I remember the slivers of sunlight that cut the room, casting each mote of dust in gold. Most of the time, the study was caught in the looming shadow of the opposing tenements, but for one glorious hour each day, the sun shone in and turned the air to honey. Caught upon every gilded title on the bookshelves, lighting up my polished ammonite like a mirror. It was a subject of constant debate between the two of us, whether the curtains ought to be left open or shut to prevent the books from fading. Evidently, however, I had won that day, for it was through a haze of that rare London sunshine that I watched through the doorway as the envelope in question slid from the letterbox and landed, with a gentleness that did not match the gravity of its contents, onto the checkered hallway floor. At first I simply stared. It was my grandmother, most likely. Her nurse had written the previous month to say she had developed pneumonia and was not faring well. I wondered for a moment whether I could simply pretend I hadn't seen the letter, if I could sit and continue my work in peace for another hour or two, until James brought us the post before supper. But then I remembered, as I had been remembering in jarring stops and starts all week, that we had given James his notice, as we could not afford to pay his wages until Henry found steady work again. And I remembered, too, that Mrs. Jemsetji had been ill earlier that month, with a persistent cold that would not cure, I looked down at the half-finished illustration upon my drawing desk, the stem of a fossil fern, Equisetum columnare, the specimen itself resting in my open palm. I'd been holding it up to the light, trying to catch every detail of its petrified surface. Now I was gripping it so tightly my knuckles were white. With a heavy heart, I set it down and rose to my feet. That is our Hades progeny. I was going to give away today as part of the giveaway with the new paperback, which actually just came out yesterday in the UK, as well as a little bookmark and these signed book plates, which I had printed for some reason. They're cute though.
Those are very cute. And I am just transfixed. I was like literally the whole time I'm just sitting like this, like, yeah, come on, just read me a little bit more. That was so good. And I love the concept. I'm obsessed with all of our authors today. All right. Well, thank you to everyone so much for coming out.